Welcome. What a turnout. Just a quick protocol and introduction. So welcome everybody. Thank you for your presence. This webinar hosted by the Urantia Association Education Committee. Today we have the participation of Brother Joshua J. Wilson, who will present the theme Machiventa Melchizedek, working on earth since 200,000 BC. So as for the protocols, during the meeting, we ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking to avoid disturbing background noises. If you want to speak, please raise your hand, either physically or electronically, and unmute yourself. Please use the chat only for webinar related questions. Use headphones if you can improve sound quality and to reduce echo background noises when speaking. Please do not type when your microphone is not muted, because we'll hear that very clearly. The session will be recorded for future study purposes. The video will be made available to the public in the Urantia Association YouTube channel. Turn off your camera if you do not like your image being used for records, and ask to speak off the record at any time you do not want what you say to be part of the videotape. This way your part will be cut out of the video during editing. Thank you so much. So, a little bio of Brother Joshua J. Wilson. Thank you so much, Brother Wilson. Joshua J. Wilson is a musician, pastoral counselor, and essayist who writes on historical and scientific subjects, harmonizing science, philosophy, and spirituality. He holds a bachelor degree in business administration and decision information systems, specializing in human behavior and organizations, and certificates of in non-for-profit management and active parenting instructions. So that's quite a resume. So I'll give it to you, Brother Joshua, and thank you so much again for your service towards us.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's take a moment in silent meditation, and let's open our minds, our hearts, our spirits to receive revelation and communion. Dear Father and dear Mother, we open our hearts and our minds to you and to your loving watch care over our lives. We know that you have good plans for us. We thank you for our parts in being part of your big universe family, and for having so many wonderful brothers and sisters with whom to share this life with, both now and into the eternal future. For all of this, we give thanks with hearts of gratitude. So be it. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, every single one of you, for coming out today. We're talking today about a most unusual character, Machiventa Melchizedek. Most of us, either from a Bible orientation or from a Urantia book orientation, are aware that Melchizedek came to earth as a minister to Abraham and lived here for 94 years. But the reason I wrote the paper, or one big reason, was to let people know that there were and are other periods that he has been on earth. I'm going to show you something on the screen here, which will help you get a picture of this. So take a look at this. If you need to see it more clearly, you might go to speaker view, which you can find in the upper right hand, whatever it takes to help you see these 5 time periods. Okay, so working on Earth since 200,000 BC. Okay, that's a long time ago. So just about the time Caligastia took his downturn, the Melchizedek receivers, well, they're known as emergency suns, so they can operate when there's an emergency. And indeed they did. They came down and took receivership responsibility for the planet, the whole planet. There was a group of 12 of them. So that was about 200,000 BC. Okay, the second segment was Sage of Salem from 1980 to 1886 BC. This was the period of 94 years. The third period was he was a collaborator with prophets and seers. And this was a very interesting period that a lot of people are not aware of. But it says in the Urantia book that he actually did this, even though he was gone, even though he was only invisibly present. For 1900 years, he was working with people. And to great effect, I might add. After this and after the life of Christ on earth, here in the AD period, we see him operating, taking his turn. We have resident governor generals on the planet that change places every 100 years. So he had his period from approximately 950 to 1050 AD, where he was also doing amazing and wonderful things on our planet. The fifth period we see here is vicegerent planetary prince. So after Michael's ascension, and not too long before the Urantia book was written, he was appointed laterally, the book says, as our vicegerent planetary prince. So that is current. Now we could add on a sixth period after that, and that would be what's coming next. Because the book says that any day or hour, at least according to one writer, the Machiventa could appear. So we might, or we certainly will, at some point be going into the next period where he is actually on Earth and setting up shop, you might say, as a setting up a planetary government. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in with some of these considerations. And thank you, Samantha, for the introduction and for hosting this. Thank you, Jeannie, and all those that were able to bring us together. This is a great opportunity to really get into some Urantia book things. I'll go ahead and start out with this first section, and then we can see how things go from here. And you might also notice on this document, it says with historical overlay of significant world events. So we're going to be looking at some world events that took place. And you also might want to notice that Machiventa, as Sage of Salem, wore the Trinity emblem. In other words, that the three concentric circles, he wore that on a pendant that was on his chest. Okay, so we start out with the member of the 12 planetary receivers. And as we said, this installation happened right after the Caligastia secession. And these emergency suns, all 12 of them, ably guided, upset world affairs in the long, slow cultural and ethical development that followed. They assisted Van and Amadon during the preparation of the Garden of Eden, and they were on duty as caretakers and receivers as the offspring of Adam and Eve dispersed in the world migrations. The second period of time, a long time after the 12 receivers took charge of our planet, well, they got to talking among themselves, and they looked down on the plight of planet Urantia, and they realized that the flame of faith was flickering. It was just about ready to die out on Earth. After having so many problems, a default and a failure, the planet was not doing so well. So they asked their superiors what could be done. And their superiors said, well, do whatever you think is best. And then the 12 planetary receivers spoke to their father, Melchizedek, and he said the same thing, do whatever you think is best. So they undertook to do something that's only been done a small number of times in the entire universe of Nebadon. And they pulled in and took hold of a possibility that, as I said, is very rare. But a Melchizedek, one of the things they can do as an emergency son is that they can actually incarnate as a human of the sphere. So the decision they made was that one of their 12, in this case the volunteer Machiventa, would actually incarnate on Earth, come down. This happened in 1980 BC, and there was a family of very spiritually potent individuals that spanned a number of generations and included a number of people. It was the family of Terah, T-E-R-A-H. And I would like to say that the Melchizedeks had their eyes on this family. Just like when you look at the family of Johann Sebastian Bach, we think of Bach as an incredible musician, of course, but a lot of people don't realize that he actually came from a generation of 4 generations of musicians. It included 60 very talented musicians and composers that Bach was just one of. Well, in the same way, Terah, the family of Terah, they had a number of very fragrant individuals, one of them being Abraham. And they could see, the Melchizedeks could see that, oh boy, just at any time, there's going to be a very capable individual born from this family. And indeed, one was born, and that was Abraham. Melchizedek trained missionaries in ancient Salem, later called Jerusalem. And I have a map of Jerusalem, an older map made about 1900, and it actually shows the area of Melchizedek, and it still has his name on it. So this is an historical fact. Melchizedek set up his shop in an area called Salem, and from there, his trained missionaries penetrated the cultures of all the surrounding tribes, and they made their teachings known especially in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Asia Minor. Later, missionaries of the Melchizedek gospel of belief and faith in God traveled even to Lake Van and preached to the descendants of Adam and Eve's son Adamson. And teachers also were dispatched to all of Europe, even the British Isles, and as far as Iceland, China, and the Japanese islands. So this person, Abraham, appeared as a fully developed human of the realm, and just very unceremoniously came up to the tent of a certain shepherd and said, "I'd like to have dinner with you." And they talked late into the night and looked out into the stars, and so began his work, which then developed into schools, a personal relationship with Abraham, who was a pretty cantankerous fellow. He had ideas of making himself into a kind of a king over the area. So Melchizedek had his work cut out, let's put it that way, to figure out what to do with this amazing person, Abraham, who's always wanted to get into battles, and his life came very close from time to time to being snuffed out in these battles. And fortunately, it appears like he had some protection, at least at one point, from the Most High Urantia, who was also stationed on the planet as an observer. And so after that battle, Melchizedek met Abraham on the road coming back and said, "Boy, I told you not to go, but you went anyway. But I want you to know that the Most High gave the battle today into your hands." In fact, Melchizedek, when he would announce himself to people, he would say that he was a priest of the Most High. Well, the Most High was this Urantia's son, who was a resident observer. So Melchizedek trained these missionaries, and they went out everywhere, as far as they could go. But unfortunately, their message did not remain wholly permanent amid all the superstitions of these early societies. But most importantly, this one God message was held on to in Palestine, and therefore paved the way for the later preaching of John the Baptist and the appearance of Jesus, the teacher of Nazareth, Son of God and Son of Man. There's been a lot of great paintings made of the meeting of Abraham and Melchizedek, and one that I've included in my essay, which I'll send to you if you want it, is by Peter Paul Rubens, and shows the two of them meeting. So this is something that people have had their eye on as Bible students for a long time, as long as the Psalms and the book of Hebrews and so forth have been available. So I've been going on for a while here. This has been a great discussion so far, but I would like to take a look at some of the chats. Someone is asking me, Brother Joshua, you're Catholic. He also makes a comment to Lyle. He says, "Lyle, don't zoom and drive. That could be dangerous." Okay, so take note of that. Okay, no, I'm not a Catholic. The reason that I use that terminology is because I spent about 20 years working in a children's home, and I was the pastor. And so I raised about 700 orphans during that time. And it was on 110 acres here in Arizona, and it was founded by my late wife's grandparents in 1955, the same year that the book came out. So we called each other brother and sister. It was kind of a Pentecostal background, but then it became interdenominational. But you know, the Urantia book says that these early believers of Jesus called each other brother and sister. I just like to remind ourselves every chance I get that we are brothers and sisters. Let me see if there's any other comments here. If anybody wants to ask a question, and I thank you from Seattle for your comment. If anybody else wants to make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to. And then Janet Falbo, she asked if you can see the notes. Anybody that wants to communicate with me, I'll answer every question. And if you'll write to me at musical, musical, at cox.net, I'll share everything I can with you. We also have the notes are in Spanish, Portuguese, and French, as well as English for anybody who would like that in a different language or wants to share it. Basically, we want to get this word out as far as we can. I want everybody to know who Melchizedek is. He's next to Christ. He's our main guy. And he's our vicegerent planetary prince. Doesn't get much better than that. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, and so I'll write my email message, email address in the chat so everybody can get that at the end. I'd like to take a little break from this long narrative and let you know that I take this very personally because I believe it was actually Machiventa who led me to the Urantia book. So to look at this, we're going to have to go way back in time. When I was first married, had my first child. My children are grown up now. I have 6 grandchildren, but so we're going back quite a ways. And I had the Bible, and I was reading the Bible and trying to get every single thing I could out of it. And I noticed this part about Melchizedek. I thought it was so incredible. A person who had no father or mother, no beginning of days or end of life. Wow, I just had to know who this was. So if I had any free time, which was not very often because I was working at the orphanage 6 days a week and 14 hours a day, we had a lot of people to cook for. And my wife and I were the cooks. So, but I would occasionally have some time off, and I would go search the occult bookstores. I could never find anything, though, that had a ring of truth. It all just seemed kind of weak to me, but I kept looking. And finally, one of my friends from the old Jesus People days, he was living down in Tucson. Actually, he was in a little town near Tucson called Oracle. Now, Oracle is a great place to find the revelation. I did not find the Oracle of Delphi, but I did find another oracle. So a friend of mine and myself, we drove down south to the Tucson area. And as when old friends get together, we had a great time, had a meal together, and started to grow late. And our host went to bed. Then I was lying on the living room floor on a sleeping bag, and I was just about asleep. But a friend of mine was staying up, and he was reading from a big blue book that was on the bookshelf. And he said to me, he said, "Hey, Josh, you're always talking about Melchizedek. Well, here's something about him." And he started to read, and I just bolted up from bed. I said, "What is that? Where did that come from? Read some more. Read that again." And I knew that my search had come to a point of discovery. And I just had to get a copy of this book. So when we left the next morning, I think I spent the last dollar in my wallet and stopped at a bookstore and bought a copy of the Urantia book. I think it was $35 or something like that back then. And that was a thrill. And the rest is, as they say, history. So you might see why I have kind of a personal interest in getting this information out. I actually believe that it was Machiventa that led me to the Urantia book. And as we go further in this study, we're going to see how this is exactly the situation. Melchizedek has some very unusual qualities, and he is able to work with people like you and I and saints and sages on the face of the earth. But before I go too much longer, Samantha, how am I doing? How much time do we have today?
If I'm not mistaken, Jeannie, it's 2 hours.
Yes, 2 hours in total.
Okay, well, we can get into this really deep then. So I hope I don't go on too long. And I know we can't open it up to questions for everybody, on voice, but maybe we could take a break after the next section and hear from Jeffrey Waddles, because I'm sure he'll have some important questions that will help guide our study today. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the second section, and then after that we'll take a break. Or actually, I guess we're on the third section now, because we went through 200,000 years as planetary receiver, and I think we've pretty well covered Machiventa's 94 years. And after the 94 years and all these missionaries were trained and they were traveling all around the world. Machiventa just disappeared as quietly and as unceremoniously as he had appeared, and he returned to the company of his fellows in the group of 12 receivers. Okay, but he wasn't finished. Now, this is an important section from the Urantia book, and you might want to make a note of it. It's in paper 93, section 10. And he was actually invisibly present on Earth for approximately 1,900 years, up until the times of the arrival and ministry of Christ on Earth. So he didn't leave us high and dry. And here in paper 93, we read, the same Melchizedek continued to collaborate throughout the 19 succeeding centuries with the many prophets and seers, thus endeavoring to keep alive the truths of Salem until the fullness of time for Michael's appearance on Earth. Okay, I'm gonna drop in a picture right now to help you visualize this. Okay, here's what it looks like. Okay, we don't really know what it looks like, but just to maybe jog your thoughts a little bit and imagine this incredible being who's actually now on an invisible and supernal realm, reaching his light, sending his light down to the people of Earth and working with us. So, good. What was that like? Well, during this striking 1,900 years of time on Earth history, many notable prophets and seers came onto the scene. And I conjecture that it was likely that Melchizedek collaborated unseen with many of them and fostered their efforts, especially as they pertain to the God concept. Highly significant persons and events include Isaac, Jacob, Amenhotep IV, who was also known as Akhenaten. Now, Akhenaten was an incredibly important individual in the life of Egypt and in the development of the God concept. Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Jacob was the grandson of Abraham. And it was from Jacob that we saw the 12 sons and the 12 tribes of Israel come forth. We also have included in this list the matchless Moses. Okay, so I want you to just stop and think for a while. There's a lot of incredible people that are on Earth and are doing work. Are they just doing it because they're geniuses or they have special genetics? Well, that was probably true to a degree. But what I'm bringing up here is that Melchizedek was actually able to work with them. Now, this does not mean that Melchizedek appeared to them and held conference with them any more than Machiventa did that with me. But what it does mean is that they were able to be guided and maybe go to the left instead of the right at a pivotal moment. Their seraphim were perhaps able to work with them in ways that were especially effective. Now, over here in the Southwest and in the Indian culture, Amerindian culture, we have the Anasazi. They also had a revival at this time. Another individual is David. Yeah, where would the history of the Hebrew people be without this incredible person, David, and his son Solomon? Also Homer, Amos. Boy, if you've never read what the Urantia book has to say about Amos, what an incredible, amazing prophet he was. also Hosea, Isaiah. Isaiah, actually two of them by that name, were incredible prophets and writers. We had Draco of Athens, Aesop, who was a great philosopher. He didn't just write the Aesop's fables. How about this one? Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha. Okay. It's very, very possible that Melchizedek was working with Buddha, even though Siddhartha did not get a hold of this personality, all-important personality facet of the Universal Father. Nevertheless, he did much to advance religion, or something close to religion, at least a high philosophy among his people. Also Confucius, who had and continues to have great effect on the religious life of China and of Eastern peoples. How about Socrates? Okay, Socrates was operating at that time, and to Socrates and the philosophers that went before him, maybe going back as far as Heraclitus, we got the all-important concept of logos. In John chapter 1, verse 1, we read, in the beginning was logos, or in the beginning was the word, or the principle, the universal pattern principle that the whole universe operates on. So we're very indebted to Socrates and the other Greek philosophers, because it was basically the union of the Jesusonian gospel, Hebrew thought and theology, and the philosophy of the Greeks that Christianity was born out of, that ended up changing the whole Roman Empire. We also had Ezra. The 12 tables of the law were written by the Romans, which is the foundation of modern law. How about this one? The founding of the Roman Republic. This is no small matter. This has informed and affected our entire polity since then. That was a pretty important event. How about this one? Democracy established in Athens. That sounds pretty important too. Nehemiah is another prophet that was operating at that time. Democritus, Hippocrates. Okay, right there we have the foundations of health and science that we're enjoying today. Plato, who was the student of Socrates, and Aristotle, who was the student of Plato. Theophrastus, Andronicus, the first Roman poet, and the writer Virgil. Okay, my dear friends, that was a mouthful. But let me ask, are you starting to get the picture that a lot of incredible things happened during those 1900 years from Melchizedek and Abraham up until the time of John the Baptist and Christ? Yes, or excuse me, I said that incorrectly. Well, let me give you the exact dates. That will help. The exact dates are 1866 BC through 30 AD. That was the period. I just wanted to be exact about that. Okay, a lot happened. The groundwork was laid, you might say, for the coming of Christ and the gospel of Christ. Okay, don't you think that Melchizedek knew that that was coming up? Well, actually, the Urantia book says yes. The Melchizedeks knew a long time ago and much time prior that Urantia had indeed been selected as the location for Michael's seventh bestowal. I think Melchizedek took this very personally. After all, Michael and the Universe Mother Spirit are his divine parents. Now he's the one. He's there. He has to make this happen. and I think he took it very seriously, and he pulled out all stops to make it happen. And indeed, much was happened. Think about it, in the realms of science, in the realms of theology, in the realms of the study of health and the study of philosophy. All of these areas moved forward. And then we come up to a time, the time period just before Christ was born as a babe on earth, which the Urantia book says was one of the most, in fact, it says not one of the most, it was the most effective and receptive time for new truth that has actually not been equaled since then. The Urantia book says, writing as of 1935 anyway. And so, yeah, I think maybe this is starting to dawn on everybody that Melchizedek had an incredible ministry. And it wasn't just 94 years. He's working with people. He worked with me. And I don't channel Melchizedek or any of that kind of stuff. I have not seen Melchizedek. That's not my experience. But when I look at the things that have happened in my life, I can connect dots. And I see what happened. We can also connect dots when we look at the history of Earth. And this was absolutely unprecedented. All those names that I listed had an incredible effect. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to questions or comments from Jeffrey. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, since I heard you commission me, I've been browsing about a little bit in paper 93, and I would like to just invite your commentary, Brother Josh, on a couple of passages. First, in section 6, paragraph 4, at the bottom of classical page 1020, there's a paragraph that, well, it's so brief. I'll just read it through and ask you to comment in the light partly of section 4, where these things are also set forth. I could try to sharpen the question just a little bit, but I so trust, based on experience, in the wonder of your comments that I think just opening a big question, as this is plenty that I could offer to the group today. Here's the paragraph. This covenant of Melchizedek with Abraham represents the great Urantian agreement between divinity and humanity, whereby God agrees to do everything. Man only agrees to believe God's promises and follow his instructions. Heretofore, it had been believed that salvation could be secured only by works, sacrifices, and offerings. Now Melchizedek again brought to Urantia the good news that salvation, favor with God, is to be had by faith. I think that's as much as I will read. Again, on page 1017, section 4, the first handful of paragraphs, you've got some commentary on that. So I eagerly turn this over to you for any discussion that you would like to generate now.
Hey, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Okay, so this gospel that the Melchizedek missionaries went out with, it was so simple, right? When you read it, believe in God, have faith, that's it. And the people are listening and they're waiting for something else, you know, and there wasn't any end. It was just that. Now, his close followers and his missionaries, they would actually sign a roll, like, yeah, I'm a member of the Melchizedek Church, and I accept these 7 prayers or precepts. I mean, they would do certain things. These were the hardcore people, okay? But basically, the gospel was very simple. Now, the curious thing is that when would go out with this gospel, it was so simple. It had various effects. Some people said, "Oh, that's what I've been waiting for. I so need to just open my heart to the spiritual presence that I know has been with me in my life. And I just want to receive it. It's almost like being born again and just having a new spiritual experience. And I'm now in fellowship with God." And I received this fellowship. And it does seem like, yes, God is doing everything. He's the one that's reaching down. He's the one that's finding me first. And he's the one that's lifting me up. This was great news. And it still is great news to people today. The success of revelations, they build upon one another. We don't negate any of the ones that have gone before. But then, other people would receive this differently. Some might be part of a priesthood. And they might say, well, our whole livelihood and everything we're doing is like, it's all about these rituals, and we have to do this, and they might have 100 or 1,000 different things that have to be done. And say, Melchizedek missionary, if we do what you're saying, we just go away. There's no need for us anymore because you've presented this simple gospel. These are the kind of dynamics that the Melchizedek missionaries were encountering. But fortunately, in many civilizations, enough of the simple gospel of salvation through faith was able to take hold, latch hold, and penetrate to give happiness, joy, spiritual life to thousands and thousands of people. It had a wonderful effect. So, Jeffrey, could you read that next passage? I'm going to get myself a drink of water. But just for the elucidation of the people that are listening, that next passage you mentioned.
All right, this is classical page 1017. This is paper 93, section 4. It's titled The Salem Religion. And I'll read the first few paragraphs. They're very short. The ceremonies of the Salem worship were very simple. Every person who signed or marked the clay tablet rolls of the Melchizedek Church committed to memory and subscribed to the following belief. 1. I believe in El Elyon, the Most High God, the only universal Father and Creator of all things. 2. I accept the Melchizedek covenant with the Most High, which bestows the favor of God on my faith, not on sacrifices and burnt offerings. 3. I promise to obey the 7 commandments of Melchizedek and to tell the good news of this covenant with the Most High to all men. And that was the whole creed of the Salem colony. But even such a short and simple declaration of faith was altogether too much and too advanced for the men of those days. They simply could not grasp the idea of getting divine favor for nothing by faith. They were too deeply confirmed in the belief that man was born under forfeit to the gods. Too long and too earnestly had they sacrificed and made gifts to the priests to be able to comprehend the good news that salvation, divine favor, was a free gift to all who would believe in the Melchizedek covenant. But Abraham did believe half-heartedly, and even that was counted for righteousness. Now, I'm going to stimulate your discourse a little bit further by opening up a couple of questions in this last sentence here. Faith and belief are sometimes distinguished in the Urantia book. At one point, Jesus talks about that salvation is to believe wholeheartedly in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. So wholehearted belief seems to be the equivalent of faith there. Now, it's very interesting. Sometimes in our personal life, you know, we might be reaching out a bit timidly, but we find that somehow, you know, there's a response to that. How wonderful. But now this counted for righteousness. What's the importance of righteousness? Why is that somehow a criterion? And how does faith count for it? Does faith have an active as well as a receptive? So now the questions are beginning to gush. And that's the extra stimulus that I'm offering to your discourse now.
Thank you very much. Faith fixates, and belief fixates and faith liberates. So the exception, of course, would be on that curve, as you described, when belief becomes wholehearted, then it impinges upon the levels of faith. Faith, we could try to define faith, or we could look at one of the things that happens to a person who has exercised faith in God. And one of the things that we see is that he is liberated. There's a great liberation, spiritual liberation that goes on. The person that holds on to a particular faith of whatever religion or philosophy it happens to be, the tendency is therefore to become fixated and to become fossilized, whereas the person who is maybe actually receives this free gift is accounted, as it says also in the Bible, to Abraham, it was accounted unto him for righteousness. Righteousness is being, what shall we say, to put it in a vernacular, to be in the flow. It's to be in the active spiritual life, and it's to be in fellowship with God. Fellowship is in a circle. It works both ways. It works all ways. And we're in active, dynamic life for the people we meet. Now, one of those requirements that you read there, Jeffrey, that the folks had to sign on to was that, and to share this gospel or this good news with all men. Okay, so let's say we finish the broadcast today, and we have a little lunch or whatever we're eating, or dinner, depending on what time of day, and we head out and we meet someone. Okay, and then we remember, oh, gee, those Melchizedek missionaries, they were something. They shared the gospel with all men. Okay, so we can look at that as kind of figuratively, like, you know, all types of people, or men and women, and people on this side of in this hemisphere, and people in the other hemisphere. Or we can just maybe say that it means all men. And so then it becomes a dynamic situation where this doesn't mean you have to hand somebody a tract, you know, about your Urantia book or something, but there's always a way to let the light and the illumination and the love of God shine through that demonstrates this very simple thing, that you are in fellowship with something divine that can come forward. So thank you. We've opened up that question a little bit about beliefs fixating and faith liberating. I think that when these Melchizedek missionaries went forth and shared this good news, because that's what the word gospel means, it's just good news. That is really actually something good to hear. When a person, they're in some country, maybe they were in Iceland. The book says the Melchizedek missionaries got as far as Iceland. Can you picture that? And to the Japanese islands. And they're sharing, and maybe they have to use a translator. I don't know. I'm just trying to picture how this could have happened. These people were determined. And they didn't have anybody sending them money on PayPal. while they were in this other country. I mean, they really had to make do. They had to get in boats. They had to travel. And then they shared this good news. And I think it was very liberating. They had gone a long ways. And by the time they actually got somebody to share with, they were pretty enthusiastic. And I can just imagine that enthusiasm hopping over to their listeners. And many of their listeners saying, wow, I want some of that. Whatever you're using, I want some of that. And this is the way faith was transmitted. So I mean, we could talk all day about this. I mean, we have to try to figure a point to move the conversation in another area or to continue it on. And I'm not sure exactly which way to go, because I always have to submit everything to the will of my Father who is in heaven. I don't start out my day or a broadcast or a session thinking that I know everything I'm going to say. But I do have to pray and be open and then exercise my faith every step of the way. One thing that I'd like to share is that I was at a Methodist church camp grounds up in Washington a couple of weeks ago. There was a Urantia conference being held there. And when I was there, I remembered when I was at a Methodist church camp in the Redwoods of California when I was about 8 years old. And we were at an ashram. Some of you recognize that Indian word ashram, which means something like a retreat. And even though my parents and my aunts and uncles and family members founded and literally and figuratively built the Methodist Church in Phoenix, it's still there on Central Avenue. As it turns out, my father was a devout Christian Scientist and read his scriptures every morning. And my mother was a follower of Sri Aurobindo. And she had a guest room. Well, the guest room in our house was fixed up with purple curtains, candles, devotional materials, books by various Eastern writers and Sri Aurobindo. And so neither of them were Methodists, but they formed the Methodist Church, and we went there. That's where I studied music, and that's where I learned a lot of what I know about the nature of God. Well, as it turns out, they were holding or were participating in this ashram at a Methodist church campground where it was a meeting of East and West. And the preacher, E. Stanley Jones, was there, and he was way up on the platform, and I was way down here on a wooden bench. I was just about, I don't know, I think I was maybe 8 years old. Can't remember exactly. And I heard him thunder out, and he said, "My cup runneth over." And one man said his saucer did too. I thought that was so funny. And just as a kid, I loved watching these kind of things go on. And as it turns out, he was taking the fourth epical revelation gospel to India. And they were centered in the town of Mumbai. And I just checked on Wikipedia. And today, that work that he started in the 1930s and 40s, and that we were participating with in the 1960s, now has 2,450 congregations in India with over 600,000 followers. Okay, you see what can happen with missionary work? A seed planted grows into a big thing. The Melchizedek gospel, as seeds planted in various places, became a big thing, especially in Palestine, where it was so important that gospel be carried forth. Now, what would happen if our movement actually paid and supported and sent over missionaries to some country and had them do something like what E. Stanley Jones was doing? Now, actually, maybe it's better that we didn't pay them, because we need to make it really hard on them. So they have to turn entirely to God for support, like the Melchizedek missionaries. Just a side thought. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, what if we were to do something like that? What would happen in 40 or 50 years? Could we turn back and say UAI now has over 2,000 outposts in that country and has hundreds of thousands of people gladly receiving the simple gospel that's portrayed in the Urantia book? Okay, if we're really going to study Melchizedek and not just make it an historical account, these are the kind of things that we need to think about. That's why I'm bringing up the 5 time periods in Machiventa's ministry, so that we can consider this just wasn't 94 years. He came, he went, he saw, and now he's gone. No, no, no. There's much more going on. With that thought, I would like to share another painting. And picture another help to visualize what Machiventa's term might have been like when he took up his 100-year term. Okay. Again, we have no idea what he looked like. I'm just trying to give you an idea that he was invisibly present and doing some amazing things. Okay, so now reading on, or sharing further, we're going to look into his period as resident governor general of Urantia. Okay, how many of you are aware, this is a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer exactly, but I'm curious, really. How many of you are really aware of the fact that at all times we have a resident governor general that's on our planet? Okay, they serve in 100-year terms. Michael set this procedure up when he left Earth after his ascension. And these governors, it's just like you have a governor in the state that you live in, right? We have a governor here in Arizona. Okay, well, this is a governor that's working with the Seraphic Planetary Government, who's over the watch care of planet Earth, planet Urantia. So each of these, they come from a group of 24 counselors, serve for 100-year terms. One of the persons on that group is Eve. Wouldn't that be amazing to imagine what it would be like with Eve, spending 100 years back here on Earth where she had served previously and actually working as a governor general? That's a possibility at any given time. Or we could list several other people like Anamanalantan, preacher to the red man, and we could list others. Now, we're going to explore this 4th period of Melchizedek's work. And this is a 100-year term as Governor General. He was visiting, and I want you to think about what happened during those 100 years. Now, you might say, well, I never heard about Melchizedek's 100-year term as governor. But the Urantia book does have some things to say about it, and he was indeed here on Earth during that time. And if we take what the Urantia book says in paper 93, it says, less than 1,000 years ago, this same Machiventa Melchizedek, a one-time sage of Salem, was invisibly present on Urantia for a period of 100 years, acting as resident governor general of the planet. And if the present system of directing planetary affairs should continue, he will be due to return in the same capacity in a little over 1,000 years. So we can back up from 1935 and we can get ourselves back to 950 AD and then go forward from there to 1050 AD. And that would be the very closely the estimated time period that Machiventa was serving. They do all kinds of interesting things as the resident governor general, and it says they hand down scores of decisions and directives every day. Well, a score is 20. What if he handed down 60 or 80 or 120 directives to Seraphic Planetary government members, and they put his directives at work every day? Well, that's kind of like what it is. And when there's that much effort and spiritual pressure and energy applied, something's going to happen. So let's find out what happened. Okay, we're looking from 950 AD to 1050 AD. The conclusion of the early Middle Ages, 964 AD, European Dark Ages. Well, that sounds pretty important. Poland becomes a Christian nation under the reign of Mieszko I in 965. That's a huge development. Formation of Peace and Truce of God movement by the Catholic Church. The first of its kind movement in medieval Europe for the control of society using nonviolent means. That was an important effort, and that happened in 989 AD. Next, the conversion of Russia to Christianity under the leadership of Vladimir I, 989. Wow. Can you imagine what our world would be like right now if Russia was not a Christian nation? There's been a tremendous revival there of Orthodox Christianity after the downturn of Bolshevism, and that is transforming that country. I think our world would be a much, much more dangerous and difficult place if this had not happened, if Christianity had not been brought to Russia. Now, as a musician, I'm very much interested in this next one, because in the year 990, musical notation was systematized. What that means is that you could, for the first time, actually write some music down. We can go back to music that was written at that time, and even though it was a primitive notation system, we can actually piece together what the music sounded like. Before that, couldn't do it. This allowed for musicians then and now to transmit, share, and transfer their music to people, many people, whole orchestras, and to have it continue after their death. We can play Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto and have it in exact form. So we could take that for granted and say, well, yeah, you can write music down, but you couldn't before 990. This happened. This is one of the things that happened during Machiventa's tenure. Now, does that mean Machiventa made this happen? I don't know. I'm just giving you an historical overlay where we take Melchizedek's time as governor. Here's the historical overlay. Here's what's happened. You'll have to make your own conclusions about why any of these things happened or how they happened. Next, we have Viking raider Leif Erikson discovers North America, calls it Vinland. That happened about the year 1000 AD. Hungary and Scandinavia converted to Christianity, 1000 AD. That was a pretty big deal. I think we would have a much greater hurdle or difficulty in sharing the Urantia book with the countries of Eastern Europe or of Scandinavia if that hadn't happened. Now, over in Japan in the year 1008, we have the first novel, as far as we know of, in entire world history, written by Murasaki Shikibu. He wrote The Tale of Genji. So literature is important. The ability to write, to preserve, and in this case, to share concepts in a novelistic form, in the form of the novel, was a great step forward. Let's go over to China, that part of the world. In the year 1021, during the Song dynasty, there was an amazing syncretism movement emerging of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. That must have been a real trick. That would be kind of like having a movement in the United States that joined Catholicism, Protestantism, and Judaism in an emerged system. Kind of hard to imagine. Of course, we know that will happen eventually. But this is the kind of thing that was going on under Melchizedek's watch, and it's pretty amazing. There was a Persian whose name was Avicenna, and he established a medical textbook, a canon, in the year 1025, and that for many, many years became the standard European medical textbook. Okay, moving forward to 1054, there was a separation between Eastern Orthodox and Western Roman churches. Now you might say, well, what's the significance of that? I thought we're all supposed to be unified. Well, here's the deal. The earth was laboring under a very severe situation of ecclesiastical totalitarianism. Unfortunately, after it finally broke up, it took a long time, you might even say until the 1800s, for this breakup to happen. But it had to happen. But unfortunately, it was replaced by secular totalitarianism, which has enslaved people just as badly. But nevertheless, this breakup it was necessary, and we had to see a wedge dropped in on ecclesiastical totalitarianism, because let run free, it would have just enslaved every man and woman's entire life down to the smallest degree throughout the entire planet. So it was broken up. Over here in the Southwest, where I live, we had the classic Pueblo period of Anasazi culture. That was from 1000 to 1300. We see significant changes in architecture, in language, in religious observances. And I've written another paper on that about concentric circle petroglyphs in the Southwest. And amazingly, a whole bunch of these appeared on these rock wall calendars. And surprisingly, there was one man who had different bone structure and was a larger size that was discovered in northern Arizona, not that far from where I live. It was buried with a lot of artifacts, and he was called the Magician. And one of the artifacts that he was buried with was a medallion that had 3 concentric circles on it. Wow, I don't know how that happened. I'm just telling you, it happened, and it's a matter of the archaeological record. And I've been in touch with the archaeologist who was recently on a BBC documentary, who has been explaining these discoveries and describing them to people. So I don't know how that happened. All I know is that North America was not left out by any means. The bases for estimating this timeline, as I said, can be taken from the Urantia book, dating back from 1935 when the book was given, and you can figure that out. Now, I would like to say something about how a resident governor general works. And I'm going to share this screenshot with you so that you can picture this, because this is a little tricky. So here it comes. Okay, if you're able to look at your screen, I think this will help you to kind of focus. Because if I'm just talking for 2 hours, I know I've put some of my students to sleep from time to time, and I don't mean to do that. I have a lot of things I want to share that I think will be of great benefit, but we need to break it up a little bit. So how does a resident governor general work? Okay, we have a serious situation on our planet. We don't have a planetary prince. Okay, everybody knows what happens to our planetary prince, right? What happened? Caligastia went the wrong way, and when a planet is put into a condition, I mean, we could have had a planetary prince. Let's say if he didn't go bad. We today could have traveled over to that part of the world. I mean, I could get a plane ticket right now. I could go to where the planetary prince headquarters is. Okay, can you picture that? This is the way it would be, and this is the way it is on a normal planet. I could also, since Adam and Eve have come, after I go there, I could get another plane ticket, and I could travel over to the garden, and I could visit there and have a cultural exchange. And I have 3 girls and 6 grandchildren. I could talk to them about, hey, you know what? You could make application over to the planetary prince headquarters, and they have a certain number of people that can, what shall we say, intermarry with the progeny of the garden. That actually could be our life on this planet, and what a thing it would be. But that did not happen. We had a number of things go wrong, and as a result of that, the upside is that Michael came to our planet. So that was a beautiful thing. And Melchizedek came to our planet. So there are consolations. But since we don't have that, what we have instead is this. Can you see where it says the Urantia Observer Most High? Just nod if you can see that. Can you see where it says Resident Governor General and then Chief of Archangels? Now, a lot of the stuff I share, I know, is news to people. Well, I've been studying this for 40 years, so I figured a bunch of stuff out. but take my word for it, or read the Urantia book. These 3 right here are what we have in lieu of, or in place of, the planetary prince that we do not have. Okay, so we have the Urantia Observer. This is a Most High. This is a real being. He's been here for a long time. And he's like the one who's most in charge. If there's a planetary emergency that's very, very serious, he can step in and take over control of all the celestial personalities on the planet, excepting the archangels. And we have a resident governor general that's here right now. We don't know who it is because human beings tend to venerate them as gods if they knew who they were. So probably wisely, we don't know exactly who that is. Otherwise, there would be a cult built up around that person. It'd be a whole nother religion. We don't need that. Okay, and then we have the Chief of Archangels. Now, these 3 operate basically as planetary prince. Okay? So what we have is we have a plan in place. And when Melchizedek was here as a resident governor general, he was one of the 24. Yes, he's actually on that council. It's mostly humans, but he unusually is on that council. Machiventa was not strictly a human, although he appeared as one, and that's something Melchizedeks are able to do. I'd like to just take a moment here. Have you ever thought about where Melchizedek comes from or how he was born? His parents are Michael and Mother, but oddly enough, he also has in his parentage the father Melchizedek. So he actually comes and is born of three individuals: Michael, Mother, and the father Melchizedek. This provides for him to be an incredibly versatile personality that can exhibit characteristics of the third source and center, the first and second source and center, and just things we can hardly imagine. The Governor General, when serving, is viewed by the Midwayers as their planetary father. As I said, the Governor General hands down scores of decisions daily. He governs chiefly through the seraphic corps, which we have 12 of those. He does not exactly make things happen, but in many ways, he or she fosters progress, including working with human personalities. It is noteworthy that Machiventa has quite a history of working with saints and sages. 94 years as a human when he was priest to Abraham, and 1900 years subsequent to that mission, during which he collaborated with spiritually potent individuals. That's why I read you that whole list. You'll be able to look at those later on, and you may come up with some names that I did not mention who were important historical figures that when you just look at what they did, you come to the conclusion they must have been getting some spiritual help from on high. Machiventa worked in both visible and invisible form, and he thus gained various and broad experience. He literally worked with saints and sages who were fostering the one God concepts that he and his missionaries had previously preached worldwide during his incarnation in the flesh. Now, all of you have taken a history course sometime or another, right? Maybe you took one in high school, maybe you took one in college, and you know when you study in academia that it has a lot to do with important battles, kings, kingdoms, and empires, and wars, and you had to memorize all those boring years and try to memorize everything so you could take the test. And a good history teacher also tried to share with you what the social repercussions of these things were. But the kind of study that we're doing today has rather to do with examining spiritual and cultural milestones that were achieved in the years cited. That's why I picked out the individuals that I shared with you, like Socrates and the prophets like Amos and so on and so forth. But I think if we religionists and philosophers realized how pivotally important religious movements have been in the making of our history, we would forsake all and do everything we could in our own lifetimes to get the gospel out. One of the ways is what we're doing right here today. And I'm so thankful that we've got this good response, and people are calling in from all over. I'd like to know who is the person who's farthest away from Arizona, where I am. So if you think you might be that person, send me a note and tell me what country you're in. But we want to do everything we can to get this gospel out. And some of the things we've begun today, we just need to keep going with. Now, these events that I shared with you that occurred during Machiventa's 100-year tenure as governor are stunning. And we are the beneficiaries today of the improvements made and set in motion during this period after Christ and during the Middle Ages. Just to reflect on that, a good part of Europe was converted to Christianity, and that faith was redirected onto a multipolar course. The seeds of the turnover of ecclesiastical totalitarianism were sprouted. North America was discovered by Europeans. Music, medicine, and the arts were improved significantly. And as noted during the Song Dynasty of China, religion was unified and strengthened under a syncretism movement that joined Neo-Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. In 1021 AD, it is recorded that there were 397,615 Buddhist monks and 61,240 nuns actively working and living in monasteries in China. I don't know if you can wrap your head around that, but that's huge. I mean, there were some real powerful and potent religious movements going on at that time. Okay, so I've been sharing a number of things, and I would like to know if there's anybody else who would like to raise their hand and ask a question. And I would like to start, I know Samantha has to kind of oversee this, but I'd like to start with Jeffrey and just kind of get some feedback, Jeffrey, on what's happening with you.
Well, I think I would like to build on your admiration of the Melchizedek missionaries bringing out the Gospel of Salem. They are said to be some of the most enthusiastic and aggressive missionaries that Urantia has ever seen. Obviously, in this connection, the word aggressive has positive connotations, not negative connotations. Next, I would like to observe that the authors of or at least one author of the Urantia book, or maybe this was in part 4. I think this was in part 4. This might have been the paper on the baptism in 40 days, where it says that Jesus, I'm really curious about this now. That Jesus was like his mission is compared to that of Melchizedek,
Right.
in that it was a simple spiritual gospel. It did not undertake the whole-scale uplifting of the culture. Now, in my reflections, I have given a great importance to that because it seems to me that there are two different types of epical revelation. One is a general cultural and spiritual revelation, like the first 2 epical revelations, and as I read it, like the 5th epical revelation. 5th epical revelation is not a simple spiritual gospel. It's got teachings on all kinds of things. But the 4th and 3rd epical revelations were simple spiritual gospels, and they were gospels to be proclaimed to all the world. And I'm obviously eager for your comments on this, Brother Joshua, but it seems to me that to treat the Urantia book as though it itself were a gospel to be proclaimed to all the world goes counter to some of the instructions that we were given. If the gospel is something to be believed and obeyed, we live in an age where obedience is not our strong suit. We are very happy to be creative and adventuresome, but obedience is a different matter. So I could go a little bit further with that, but I'll just stop there because that may be enough stimulus for you and others to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are real connections, and thank you, Jeffrey. There's real connections, I mean, that are deep, that run through the lives and ministries of both Melchizedek and of Jesus, which we shall take a look at. And also I want to comment, I got a message here that when I asked for who's the farthest away, it's somebody from Homer, Alaska. I believe Homer, Alaska is the westernmost town in the United States. The reason I happen to know that little factoid is because Tom Choquette grew up in Homer, Alaska, and he told me that. So, and I see some other comments. Didn't the missionaries also island hop across the Pacific Ocean? And yeah, we could get quite a bit into their movements, and also the movements of the Andites that reached the west coast of South America. So a lot of cool things going on, and it's great to see Andre here on this chat board also. Great to hear from you. So it's just great to be with you all. I just love this discourse that we're having, and a lot of sharing and a discovery about what happened and what, as we are learning, is happening in the ministry of Melchizedek that continues unto this day. But one of the things that we could bring up that's pretty important is the fact that the two of them shared the same thought adjuster. I mean, this is an incredible thing. So I think I'll just dive right in a little bit to that subject. And we can get into the fifth period. We've covered 4. And you might want to write these down, to help you to remember them. You can also get the printed essay. But the first, just to go over it again, was working on Earth as one of the planetary receivers. That goes back 200,000 years. The second was Sage of Salem in 1980 BC with Abraham. The third was collaborator with prophets and seers, which the Urantia book says was about 1900 years, and started right after his time with Abraham. The fourth is Melchizedek as resident governor general, which was a specialized ministry that lasted for 100 years. Okay, that brings us to the fifth time period, okay? And that is Vicegerent, planetary prince of Urantia. Okay, a vicegerent is someone who serves in someone else's stead. We know that Christ, Michael, is the planetary prince of Urantia. That's for sure. He has taken this little planet, one planet among a number which will eventually reach 10 million in the universe of Nebadon, and he has taken this little planet, and he is our personal planetary prince. I mean, this is an amazing thing. He's not only the sovereign of Nebadon over all these worlds, but he's very particularly our planetary prince. That's a wonderful thing to know. And he has, according to the book, well, I'll just read it from paper 45. This Melchizedek has latterly been proclaimed vicegerent planetary prince of Urantia, with headquarters on Jerusalem and authority to act in behalf of Michael, who is actually the planetary prince of the world, whereon he experienced his terminal bestowal in human form. Okay, so now we have actually covered the 5 periods, and I hope that this has opened many eyes to understand the breadth and depth of Melchizedek's ministry. It started way, way back in the earliest times when our planet was plunged into darkness, to actually take responsibility. When I talk with young men and young women and counseling with them, I tell them that my philosophy or my mantra is very simple, and that is take responsibility. And as you take responsibility and maybe take on more of it than you ever have before, that you can alleviate some of the suffering of the world. And this message really resonates with young people who are seeking a sense of direction. And here in our society over here, at our last Jesus birthday party, about half the number were young people, and then the other half were the 55 and age, 55 years of age and up group. And we make a real emphasis on including families with children, young people, and giving this very simple message: take responsibility. Those that are maybe moving through life and their education and their early families without a sense of direction suddenly find a deep direction. Well, this is what Melchizedek's message to me also is: take responsibility. And that's what he did, and that's what the other 11 planetary receivers did. I mean, this was a real thing. They took responsibility for our world, and they were largely on their own. They would contact other beings and might have been supervisor in supervisoral capacities, and they got the word back: just, you need to do what you think is best. I mean, they really, very literally had responsibility, and they took it. And so when we look at this triumvirate of the Veranda deck and the resident governor general and the chief of archangels, we can actually commit to work with celestials. And I actually did this. I wrote a letter. I typed it out. I said, "Dear so-and-so and so-and-so," I listed them out. I says, "I commit myself to working with you and with the Seraphic planetary government. And I realize that you're serving in lieu of a planetary prince, which is not really active on the planet at this time." I put it in an envelope. I put a stamp on it, and I mailed it to myself. I sent it in the mail. And it came back. I was wondering if it might have some writing on it when it came back, but no, it didn't. But I mean, this is how I take this. I really want to work with our Seraphic planetary government. And so how do I do that? Well, we know we have the realms of prayer and meditation. So I would like to share with you some thoughts on prayer, because prayer specifically has to do with petitions to the Eternal Son as the second person of Paradise deity. The Son's sons, such as Christ Michael, also receive requests. Machiventa, a universe son, is the joint offspring of Christ Michael, the universe mother, and the father Melchizedek. Why should we not also make known to Machiventa our thoughts and our willingness to partner with him and with the current members of our planetary government? I have done so, as I explained. Now, this is not exactly like praying to Melchizedek. That's not what I'm saying. The prayers are addressed ultimately, or I might say absolutely, to the Eternal Son. But we are working with Machiventa. He is working with us. Why can't we make our thoughts and our willingness to partner? What's wrong with that? Why can't we communicate with our own seraphim and say, I want to cooperate with you. I want to be in working harmony with you. Now, Christ brought me into the kingdom, but those who know my history, as I shared with you at the beginning of the program, that I completely believe that it was Machiventa Melchizedek who brought me to a fuller understanding of my work and actually led me to the Urantia book. And we should remember that when Michael was on earth as Jesus, he was indwelt by the same adjuster that had previously indwelt Machiventa during his earthly life. Thus, Jesus' experiential knowledge of living and working with the men and women of earth was also informed during his life by Machiventa's experiences, which we now see were extensive. This is a very real happening. I mean, Jesus' thought adjuster was actually helping him when he was meeting with that lad on the mountain, when he was meeting with that angry man that was in the marketplace. Jesus' thought adjuster was with him, helping him when he was doing all kinds of ministry with the people that even lived in Nazareth. Okay? Now, it's true his thought adjuster departed, but when his thought adjuster departed, it appeared above his head right after that as the now personalized adjuster and the leader of all adjusters on planet Urantia. These were momentous occurrences. But the fact that Jesus and Machiventa, for a time, both shared a thought adjuster, and these are beings who ordinarily would not have a thought adjuster. Machiventa was a special case because he was incarnated as a human. Jesus was a way special case as he was incarnated, the creator becoming the creature on our world, and he received a thought adjuster, probably just like all children and just like we did. So we can only imagine the close camaraderie that Michael and Machiventa have enjoyed even to this day. And though we may not be aware of this fact other than intellectually, we are privileged that this marvelous adjuster became personalized at the time of Jesus' baptism, and in some way is ruling over a lot of what we're experiencing now in the spiritual life. The indwelling spirit for both of those extraordinary incarnations surely has helped our entire universe move toward light and life in ways that we cannot conceive. And so it seems that Michael's selection of the highly experienced and versatile emergency son, Machiventa, to be our current vicegerent planetary prince was the perfect choice. His headquarters is now on Jerusalem. I'm going to be closing a little bit later with some thoughts about how to go forward and a couple of final quotes. But I want to take a moment out here for looking at some comments. I hear from Meredith. She says that she feels blessed in very much the same way, working with our helpers and supporters. And I see some comments about future periods where Melchizedek could reign again as Governor General. And so I'm just kind of going through this and looking at some comments. We have a recognition or quotation from Samantha about personal spiritual religious experience being the efficient solvent for most difficulties, mortal difficulties. Isn't that the truth? I don't use Dawn detergent because I think it's dangerous, because it's such a good solvent. But if you use Dawn detergent, that will dissolve just about any kind of grease that you may have on your plants, your plates, and so forth. It is a solvent. Okay, this one says that personal religious experience is an efficient solvent.
If I just may, Richard Rosen raised his hand.
Okay. Richard, could you tell us what's on your mind?
Yes. Question. I wonder if Melchizedek chose his governorship when civilization was receptive to change compared to the prior Dark Ages, and could it be that the prior resident governors didn't have the breadth and depth of experience to be as effective during this pivotal period?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case, actually, Richard. And we read in the book that the conditions in Palestine before the coming of John the Baptist and Jesus were the most receptive, pivotal times in the entire history of the world. I think that Machiventa and the other planetary receivers totally had that dialed in. I think they could completely see that that was the case. And how those decisions are made on Jerusalem, like who's going to be the next governor general. I don't know exactly how they make those decisions, but I can bet you that Melchizedek raised his hand and said, boy, this is the perfect time, and I'd like to go down now. And I'm sure he received the permission, and that's the way that it worked out. The times were very open for development, and I would like to turn this over to Jeffrey for a moment while I clear my throat.
Clear your throat away here. I'm just going to muse for a moment on the your expression of willingness to cooperate, harmonize with, and collaborate with our unseen friends, and Melchizedek in particular. And I would like to ask you how this intention to collaborate, cooperate, harmonize actually affects your daily life at times. Does it make you do anything differently when you speak, write, do what you do for the kingdom of God and advance truth generally?
You know, there's musicians that talk about having a muse. Schumann was one of those. You know, there's paintings showing Schumann composing at the piano and this muse is above his head. It's interesting that the word Urantia is named after one of the Greek muses, who was the muse over astronomy. And so there's a connection. We do have, just as artists and musicians and other thinkers and creators, creative individuals, have said they feel like they have a muse. Okay, in actuality, we do have our seraphim. We have our two seraphim. They are really working with us all the time to help guide our attention into certain directions. This is what's been happening with me, really, since the start of this journey, and increasingly as we go into the present tense. I feel that this Melchizedek paper that I've written here has really been 40 years in development, and I'm just thrilled to see the response. It's because people are sensitized to the presence of Melchizedek's ministry on earth. It's just a reality. Just as people are sensitized to the ministry of the Mother through her Holy Spirit, people are sensitized and energized through the presence of the Spirit of Truth from Christ Michael. When we speak to them, and when we feel led to share good things and good news with people, it's almost like the miracle at Cana. We pour in water, and it's just plain old H2O, and then it turns into something else. It turns into this life-giving fluid that makes the party happy. And everybody's having a good time, and people are receiving insights. Well, I'm leaving the allegory now of the wine and moving over into the spirit. We place, as it is, a seed or the water of the word, however you want to look at that, and something happens beautiful within the person. They are changed. Now, we can be led and we can be directed to answer your question. I feel we are. I feel the seraphim have been guiding all of us. I felt like I was guided to write on this topic, and I have dozens of other full-blown articles the same length and extent and detail to this one on Machiventa, which I have been sharing and will continue to share. And I feel like it is almost like what Schumann said, having a muse when he composed. And I compose music and I write music, and I hope to be sharing more of that with you folks in the future. And it's not like I have a divine revelation or anything like that, but I do think that I am encouraged. I think all of us are. And we come into new possibilities of spiritual insight. And these are actually cosmic intuitions. The cosmic intuitions are logical acumen, and it has to make sense. It has to be logical. It has to be scientific. So if we're getting an intuition and it doesn't really line up with good sense, then we may be having a hallucination instead. But if we have that kind of intuition that makes sense, that's a good start. And then the second cosmic intuition is moral discernment. We find ourselves able to matriculate and correlate and recognize what truly is the right path to take, what is sound spiritually, and what is spiritually fragrant. As we move through those, we can come to a third intuition, cosmic intuition, and that is spiritual insight. And during that time, our spiritual insights inform what we have been thinking about in our minds. Mind seeks to have domination over matter, and then spirit seeks to have the ascendancy over mind. As we're living in that fashion, we do have intuition. And so to answer your question, Jeffrey, that is the kind of intuition that informs, what am I going to do today? What am I going to write? Yeah, how am I going to solve that problem? What is that efficient solvent for that really serious problem that I have to solve that's been bothering me for 3 weeks and keeps coming to my mind over and over again and starting to weigh me down? How am I supposed to go forward with the good news and be able to earn a living at the same time? Oh boy, that's been a trick for a lot of us, hasn't it? Unless there's somebody out there who is independently wealthy. And even if you are, then you have big responsibilities in how to manage that. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Those are the intuitions. And so I'm looking over now. Thank you for that question, comment, Jeffrey. I'm looking at the questions. Okay, Richard Rose and another are asking how they can get a copy of stuff. There's many ways to get this. It's on various forums, but I would like to give you the most direct way. So I'm going to spell out my email address. I always answer everybody who writes me. It's very simple. It's musical. musical at cox.net, cox.net. And if you still can't find it, just ask one of your friends, and they probably have it. Okay, so, and then we hear from Andre Rodatus. Hey, Andre, great to hear from you. Speaking of music, Josh, might not the results we see come along after the Governor General, virtually a conductor, enacts his or her proclamations? Conductors are usually a few bars ahead of the score of the musicians, are they not? Oh, yeah. These conductors, I was just talking with someone a couple days ago about this. We were looking at a conductor score. It's very tall, and you have to flip it open and read a whole page at a time. And yes, you have to be looking ahead to see what's coming up. And this is precisely the kinds of things that a universe astronomers and prognosticators, and certainly the people looking over the welfare of our planet, they surely do that. And so let's hope that our leaders take the baton, our earthly leaders, and are able to think ahead. with what's happening in our next Urantia spring that's coming forward. We're going to go into a new area and a new period. I see we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to read a couple of final quotes. This is from paper 114 to inspire you. Some believe that Machiventa will not come to take personal direction of Urantia affairs until the end of the current dispensation. Others hold that the vicegerent prince may not come as such until Michael sometime returns to Urantia as he promised when still in the flesh. Still others, including this narrator, look for Melchizedek's appearance any day or any hour. Okay, so I don't know how that would happen, but I know that whenever he comes, he's going to set up a planetary government here on Earth. And he might just show up to one person to start with, just like he did that fellow in the tent years ago. And he might show up and say, I'd like to have dinner with you. And they say, well, who is this? And it says Machiventa. You can say, well, I'd like to see some identification. And if he pulls out something that looks like a glowing cell phone with an imprimatur from Salvington or Jerusalem, then that may be the case. I'm just imagining things, people. I do that sometimes. I have no idea how it would happen. All I know is that it is entirely possible, according to one narrator, that he could appear at any day or any hour. And I'd like to read the final quote from paper 93. It says, "This is the story of Machiventa Melchizedek, one of the most unique of all characters ever to become connected with the history of Urantia, and a personality who may be destined to play an important role in the future experience of your irregular and unusual world. One of the most unique of all characters." Okay, so we do have an irregular and unusual world, and that calls for irregular and unusual solutions, and we have them. So let us put our hand to the plow of world progress and move forward with dedication, faith, intelligence, and confidence. And I will share with you one more picture. This is kind of crazy, but this is a guy I just thought maybe looked something like Melchizedek might have looked like. Okay, and there on the right side we have this beautiful painting that was done by John Byron. He's passed on now, but he did those beautiful posters. And so it's real. A real person, a real personality in the universe, and somebody who's really working for our benefit. Hi there, Diane.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, Josh and everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your great presentation. And as you were speaking, it becomes clearer and clearer that the time for Machiventa is coming up. And just as you know, just to be I'll be going in 2.5 months to Jerusalem again, because in the spring they have officially found what they have named the Machiventa, the Melchizedek standing stone, and the altar of worship of Abraham, who we know is the father of those 3 monotheistic religions. It goes exactly hand in hand with all that you've been saying. So energy-wise, this must all be planned, that it's unfolding like you just move the first block and then it goes bang, bang, bang. And so to go there and to see it officially is going to be extraordinary. So maybe it's like to be continued.
Thank you, Diane. That's going to be an incredible trip. I mean, I've got a map here. This is made about in the 1900s. And you can actually see the place on here where it says Mount of Melchizedek. And now, as Diane has explained, they found this particular stone and location. I mean, this is a historical fact. So looking forward to that trip, as many people as can get on it as possible. And Samantha, I turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much for this lovely presentation. and some supplement information that we did not know. So thank you so much for your time. Jeannie, is there something you'd like to say?
I only want to thank you, Joshua. Your presentation, amazing. And everyone for coming, for your presence here. We are very honored having you all here. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your time. God bless you all.
God bless you. Good day.